Chicago in the past few days also dealing with its own immigration protests. It centers around several migrants, along with a Chicago mother being detained by ICE officials while on a regular check-in with the immigration office. Family members claimed they received texts telling them to report to an office for a check-in, where they were ultimately detained. With us now is Alderman Raymond Lopez from Chicago's 15th Ward. Alderman, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning, Hena. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Where does the situation stand as of this morning? Are those migrants, that mother, still being held by ICE?
So those individuals still are being held by ICE, and we've seen numerous situations where protesters are trying to almost replicate exactly what you've seen in LA, although they haven't been as successful in creating mass mobilizations against ICE. But what we do know is this: there's a definite difference, as the Secretary Noem has stated, between peaceful protests and trying to obstruct justice and obstruct our federal officers. And many times all of this could have been resolved if sanctuary cities like Chicago, like LA, had in fact amended their welcoming ordinances and worked with immigration officials to go after those most dangerous individuals in our cities and in our country, many of whom the Biden-Harris administration knew about. You know, I understand President Trump's frustration because those were his targets, but since he's not been able to meet his predetermined quotas, now he's expanding the outreach. And I think we still have the opportunity, if we want to end these collateral captures and if we want to get ICE out of our communities, then we should start working with them to hand over into their custody those dangerous individuals that they've been looking for since the start of their administration.
Alderman, what's unfolding in Chicago and, of course, across the country? Do you think protests that turn violent with these authorities is justified?
I don't think that it is justified, because we have to remember that these are individuals who entered into this country illegally. And even if there weren't a pathway, or even if they've been here respecting the laws once they've gotten here, they still have had no time to get their pathway to citizenship or legalization squared away in a manner that makes sense to most average Americans. If you want to protest what's going on, then you should be protesting your federal partner, your federal elected officials, your members of Congress, and asking them why they've done nothing over the last 40 years since Reagan granted amnesty to create pathways for individuals who are here illegally to have citizenship, to have legal residency. What we are seeing now is the implementation of laws that exist for the federal government to secure our borders and work to remove those who are here undocumented, who are non-citizens, who've overstayed visas, or who have come into this country through open borders. That is their job, and that is what they're trying to do. And if you don't like that, then protest that, but don't do that in a way that impedes law enforcement and causes these altercations. We've seen where children were being brought to riots and being pepper sprayed. You cannot blame that on law enforcement. You cannot blame that on the federal government. You have to remember that there's a time and a place for you to protest, and there's a time and a place to take action in the correct and responsible way.
Homeland Secretary Noem is speaking out. She has a strong message to protesters, saying if you lay a hand on law enforcement officers, you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. What's your response to that, Alderman?
Well, I think she's absolutely correct. Her team, Homeland Security, has a job to do, and they're trying to do it as best as they can under the constraints that they've been given. And they, too, also want to go home to their families. What we do know is this, is that in trying to do this is a very difficult and dangerous job for many of our immigration enforcement officers who are out there, for the FBI and everyone else in the federal government, and for those who are locally trying to just preserve the peace, as we've seen in Chicago, where our police officers have had to come in between protesters and federal authorities just to keep them safe, to keep them from harming themselves. This is a very tense and dangerous situation that we don't need people who are trying to maximize the photo op getting involved, trying to create even more chaos. We do know that many of the professional agitators are now descending into these protests and trying to turn them into riots, trying to turn them into something else, because they want to replicate what they saw during the George Floyd murder and the riots of 2020. That is not what we need right now.
Alderman, your fellow Alderman, Brian Cicho Lopez, is actually comparing these ICE arrests to what happened during World War II. He said this on X, quote, "What we saw today is Gestapo-style abductions happening in front of all of us," end quote. He then added, the actions in Chicago violate constitutional rights. Alderman, the question I pose to you is, what would you say to him? And should Chicago politicians work together on this huge issue affecting your city?
I would love for politicians to work together of all stripes, whether they're in Chicago, whether they're in LA, whether they're in Washington, D.C. But I will say this about my colleague. he's 100% wrong, and he's trying to gaslight the public, because he also accused our federal immigration enforcement officers that day of being part of the Proud Boys and other racist organizations. That is not the case. They're here to do a job. They're here to preserve the oath that they took, similar to the oath that we took, which was to defend the Constitution in the United States.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe below and download our NewsNation app right now on your phone, and you will get fact-based, unbiased news for all Americans.